Y'all are looking at this picture right now in this title and like, Torian, where are you going with this? Well, I would not have made this video if it wasn't for something I actually heard on one of those news networks today. And they were talking about Joe Biden and his need to have a black female running mate as, I guess, vice president. And I'm sitting here like, oh my God, here they go with this yet again. And basically what they were saying is, well, black women are on the front line of the Democratic Party, so that should be all the more reason that he should have a black running mate to be vice president. And I'm sitting there like, are you serious? Do you think that's the only thing that actually makes you qualified as a person to be a vice president? Let's take it back to 44. He picked I'm not sure what she is. I want to say either Latina or Mexican, Sotomayor, to be up there. They desperately wanted a female of color. And this is one of the few times I use this, to be in that position. And that's exactly what he got or what he chose, a Latina or a Mexican. He didn't choose a black woman. And some people were a little upset by that, but many of them got over it because of the sensationalism behind who Obama was at that time. But they so desperately want a black female running mate for Joe Biden. But the thing is, they don't even know who to choose. So it's like, and that's the scarier part. Like, that just sounds like, to me, you're just going to throw anybody in there, or anyone will do for you. But this also goes back to what I've been saying, who they cater to the most when it comes to politics, in a very tone deaf like way. They don't come to us because they already know how many black men feel when it comes to certain situations like this, because they don't ask us our input anyways, as if we don't exist. So I came across this article that was posted on April 24th on the New York Times, and it's called "Black Leaders Want a Black Woman as Biden's Running Mate, but Who?" And this article was actually written by a black man. His name is Asted Herndon. And it says, among black leaders close to Joe Biden, a commitment to selecting a woman is not enough. They have publicly and privately pushed him to select a black woman to fuel black voter enthusiasm. I can tell you right now, it's many black people that are not enthused by Mr. Touchy-feely, creepy Jim Crow Joe Biden. Not many at all. Especially with a lot of stuff that we have learned about him over just the last year alone. But they think that if they can get a black woman who's most likely going to be steeped in mammyism, that will turn the tide. But when we ask them about tangibles, reparations, they turn a blind eye. But see, that lets you know right there, they don't care about that themselves. All they want is the attention to be in the forefront, next to Zaddy. Why am I not surprised? They ain't doing this for us. We could care less. Let's say he does get a female running mate. What is that going to do for us? Wow, people going out to vote for him. What is that going to do? Is he going to do anything for us? Most likely not. Remember what happened with Doug Jones? All those black women voted for him, and to this day, I have yet to hear what he has done for any of them. And that happened, 2 years ago? Was it 2 years ago? And I still have yet to hear anything come from him that's talking about what he has done for the base that supported him. You know why? Because it takes money. Many of them don't have the capital to put into this. They think just because they're a black woman that, I can go ahead and do it like this, and that's it. That's enough. No, that is not enough. Many of them do not understand politics. I'm not going to say none of them don't, but many of them do not understand how this game works. Now, I have to put this disclaimer because many people will come on here and think that I'm supporting 45. And I always have to say, I support neither one of them. I always have to say that because someone's going to take it out of context. We're just thinking logically over here. And logically, this isn't going to work. Let me get into it. 4 years ago, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey made his vice presidential pitch to Hillary Clinton at her Washington home months before she faced 45 in the November election. Mr. Booker, the only African American to make Mrs. Clinton's shortlist, argued that the presence of a black running mate would motivate black voters, helping Mrs. Clinton recreate the coalition that backed former President Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. Well, look at that didn't work out for her now, did it? Because while she may have had the popular vote, she still didn't have the electoral vote, and it didn't go in her favor. But Mrs. Clinton had won the Democratic nomination with substantial black support, and some of her advisors argued that many black voters would already be energized by 45's divisive candidacy and appeals to white conservatives, according to several people involved in the selection. After weighing in the strengths and weaknesses of Mr. Booker, among others, she chose Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, a white moderate, widely seen as a safe, traditional pick. Now look at that. She dumped the black guy and went for the white guy. Kaine brought good and solid credentials, said Minion Moore, a key advisor to Mrs. Clinton, who participated in the selection process. But the difference between a Cory and a Tim Kaine could have closed the enthusiasm gap. Looking back at it, it's fair for people to ask if we should have factored enthusiasm more into it. Listen, they just told... And that's a prime example. They just told you how they got down. She dumped the black guy and went straight for the white guy and still lost. And to be honest, I believe she would have still lost even if she had Cory Booker on her side still. No two presidential cycles are completely analogous, but as former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. begins his search for a running mate, Mrs. Clinton's loss in the weaker than expected black turnout in 2016, which they still found a way to blame us for, are on the minds of top Democrats. Mr. Biden has already committed to selecting a woman, and he and his allies have repeatedly mentioned 2 black women as possibilities. Kamala Harris, oh God, the woman who just declared her blackness like a year ago, and Stacey Abrams, the party's 2018 nominee for governor of Georgia, as well as several white women, particularly Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota and Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. Pressure has been growing on Mr. Biden to choose a black woman to inspire black turnout this fall and not take it for granted. The Reverend Al Sharpton, for instance, who speaks to Mr. Biden regularly, is to announce his support for Ms. Abrams as vice president as soon as next week, according to those familiar with his plans. See, like I said, they're not doing this to try to get black people to turn out to vote because, to be honest, many of us have already decided to sit this thing out way before they came up with this as an idea. And see, this goes back to the tone deafness of it all. They don't hear us. Like I said, it goes in one ear and out the other. And they refuse to hear us. And it doesn't surprise any of us. And you know what? Should they lose in November, that's going to be on them. But watch, they're going to deflect and they're going to knock it back on us. Say, well, since you didn't go out and vote, that's why 45 got reelected. Okay, if you really want to believe that, then okay, go right on ahead. Yet Mr. Biden is facing other factors and pressures as well. He has said he wants someone who was prepared to step into the vice presidency immediately, a nod to the value he puts on government and leadership experience. He would be the oldest president ever, set at age 78 on Inauguration Day, and is looking for a partner and possibly a potential successor. With the country deep into the virus pandemic, voters will also assess whether his running mate appears capable of handling the worst national crisis since World War II. Kamala Harris, who has statewide and national experience, is seen in the Biden camp as a more likely pick than Ms. Abrams, who was a state legislative leader for a decade before losing her bid for governor. Still, some Democrats believe that choosing a hands-on governor or veteran senator is a better fit for the crisis than Kamala Harris, who was Attorney General of California and has been in the Senate for 3 years. Let me tell you something right now. This little thing right here isn't going to work. And in a way, Joe Biden is subliminally saying, when he made that statement, that he doesn't want a black woman as a running mate. And what they're doing is they're trying to pressure him into choosing a black woman just because she's a black woman. Not because she's qualified, but just because she's a black woman. Because the two examples that they gave, I can already tell you neither one of them will be qualified. Mr. Biden's selection has also become a vehicle for a broader debate among Democrats about the best strategy to win back the White House, while candidates like Ms. Harris or Ms. Abrams could energize core Democratic constituencies such as black voters or younger voters, as well as women. Ms. Whitmer and Ms. Klobuchar could be a geographic plus, considering they hail from the upper Midwest region, important to the Electoral College, in which that's what you would need to win. Among some black leaders and activists close to Mr. Biden, including Representative Jim Clyburn. Oh God, see who they hold up as leaders? And former Democratic Party Chair Donna Brazile, a commitment to selecting a woman is not enough. They have publicly and privately pushed Mr. Biden to select a black woman, arguing black voter enthusiasm may hinge on it. I'm rooting for everybody black, said Leah Daltrey, the former chief executive of the Democratic National Convention, quoting the actress Issa Rae, who used the phrase at the 2017 Emmys. Mr. Sharpton, the civil rights activist and talk show host, said Mr. Biden will get the overwhelming majority of the black vote. The question is turnout. Now, I've told him my preference is for a black woman, but you also got to choose the right black woman, Mr. Sharpton said in the interview. In the middle of this pandemic, you have to choose someone that people, and particularly black people, believe can govern from day one. Well, based on how many of them responded, or lack of response when it comes to talking about tangibles, I would say that many of us, those of us who are for tangibles, would not choose any one of them. Because all you got to do is ask that one question, and depending on their answer will depend on which way we would sway our decision. I'm telling you, it's not going to turn out good for them. It's going to look like 2016 all over again. I will be pleasantly surprised if it goes their way. Ms. Abrams herself has been outspoken on the issue, taking the unusual route of publicly making the case for why Mr. Biden should choose her. She also said during an interview this week on ABC's The View that she would have concerns if Mr. Biden didn't choose a woman of color as his running mate. Women of color, particularly black women, are the strongest part of the Democratic Party, the most loyal. Well, she's really honest about that, and unfortunately, it really has gotten many of them nowhere. She said, we need a ticket that reflects the diversity in America. There is no precedent for the selection of a black running mate. There is also little evidence that vice presidential selections sway general elections in a meaningful way, including Hillary Clinton's selection of Mr. Kaine in 2016, still citing a dip in black turnout 4 years ago, and the importance of black urban centers such as Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Cleveland in the Electoral College. Proponents like Mr. Sharpton argue that a black woman could help Mr. Biden. In 2016, the black voter turnout rate in the presidential election declined for the first time in 20 years. It was 7 percentage points lower than the record highs of Mr. Obama's 2012 re-election. The black share of the electorate also slipped from 13% in 2012 to 12% in 2016, a difference of 1.5 million black voters, according to Ted Johnson, a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice who studies how race affects voting behavior. Amy Allison, the founder of She the People, a political group aiming to increase participation from all women of color by 3 to 5 percentage points in the general election, said a survey of her organization's members preferred Ms. Abrams, with Ms. Harris coming in second. Among the black women primary voters, we saw Joe Biden was head and shoulders the pick, Ms. Allison said. But what we need to do now is expand across demographics to places where someone like Sanders showed strength, among Latinas in Texas and Nevada, and with Asian Americans. But a preference for Ms. Abrams or Ms. Harris is far from a consensus opinion, with jockeying wrapped up in part in personal histories and Washington power plays. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has encouraged allies to float names of House members like Representatives Val Demings of Florida and Marcia Fudge of Ohio, according to people familiar with those conversations, in part to reward members of her caucus with a higher profile. Several leaders in the Congressional Black Caucus, an organization steeped in tradition, have preferred Ms. Harris, who was a member. Georgia politicians like Atlanta's former mayor Kasim Reed and his current mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who endorsed Mr. Biden early, is a top surrogate, are former political rivals of Ms. Abrams. A recent comment from Mr. Clyburn publicly undercuts Ms. Abrams in favor of Ms. Bottoms. Mr. Clyburn, who declined an interview request for this article, said Ms. Abrams lacked sufficient experience. There's a young lady right there in Georgia who I think will make a tremendous VP candidate, and that's the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms. Mr. Biden has been cautious about saying too much about his preferences. He said this week he expected to form a selection panel for his running mate by May 1st and has repeatedly said his top priority is a governing partner he can trust, someone with whom he is simpatico. During an interview with local television in Pittsburgh this week, Mr. Biden said he would choose Michelle Obama as his running mate in a heartbeat, but thought she did not want to return to the White House. He largely pivoted away from a question about a black woman serving as his running mate, noting that he had already committed to nominating a black woman for the Supreme Court. There it is. This lets me know right here that he has no intention of choosing a black woman. But we're going to see how this all plays out. And because guess what? They're going to be crying a river should he actually choose someone who is non-black. Now, it's crazy because they said you have some of them talking about this women of color and women of color stuff like that. Let's say he does choose a woman of color, which is the same thing that 45 did with Sotomayor a few years ago. Then that's when the fangs are going to come out. I'll commit to that being to be a woman because it is very important that my administration look like the public and look like the nation. There will be a woman of color in the Supreme Court. That doesn't mean there won't be a vice president as well. Woman of color, that doesn't mean black. He's leaving it wide open. Recent state polls, including Florida and Michigan, indicate that Mr. Biden begins the general election in a position of relative strength with stronger support among older voters than Ms. Clinton had in 2016 exit polls. Jennifer Palmieri, the communications director for Mrs. Clinton's 2016 campaign, said that Mr. Biden should make decisions that keep intact his winning primary campaign coalition. Ideological moderates, black voters, and older voters, among others. He had a huge win on Super Tuesday, so what does that tell you about his support and what it's about? I would not want to mess with that magic. That's going to be your ticket into November, she added, as opposed to walking away from and thinking, okay, now we need another form of coalition. Some black Democrats said that choosing Ms. Klobuchar or Ms. Whitmer could make political sense. Ms. Moore from the Clinton campaign and said Mr. Biden deserved full deference in making his selection, even if she prefers a black woman as his choice. Others cited political liabilities for Ms. Abrams or Ms. Harris, considering Ms. Abrams is untested nationally and Ms. Harris struggled to excite black voters during her 2020 presidential run. They're definitely right about that second part. In a national poll of black voters from this year's Washington Post and IPSOs earlier this year, just over a quarter said that in the event a white candidate won the nomination, it would be important for them to see a black person chosen as the running mate. 74% of black Democratic voters said this would not be very important to them. But Ms. Brazil, who was close to Mr. Biden, offered a warning. Given that several black women are qualified for the role, she said Mr. Biden risks striking an unintended and problematic note that their fitness to serve if he goes in a different direction. Biden has street cred, but at the same time, it's important to send a message, to send a signal, and to brand the Democratic Party as a party of diversity. And I think any other message will be read as rejection. Ms. Brazil considered her words. I know that sounds awful, but it's true, she said. It will be seen as a rejection of viable black women. Listen, all I'm saying is this. Just because they're going out there to vote for you and everything like that, because that's basically what it's reading as. When they told them that they are the backbone of the Democratic Party, now they believe they should get all of these luxuries. All many of them did was just go and fill out a ballot, which pretty much every group has been known to do. So it's like, what made you so special? And it almost sounds like they're going to bully him into doing it. That's why I said, if he chooses a non-black woman, and it could be a white woman, or it could be an Asian woman, or Latina, or anyone who's not black, another slap in their face. And what will they do then? Probably still vote for him because they don't like 45 that much. I'm like, y'all are basically no different than a lot of 45 supporters that voting against their own interests, because that's exactly what they did. And that's what many of these individuals right here in the Democratic Party are still continuing to do. That's why I've always said right, left, conservative, liberal, Democrat, conservative are two wings on the same demonic bat. Y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter if you haven't done so already. Have your notifications turned on, and I'll talk to you in the next one.